Hi, and welcome back to First Chapter Friday with Miss Mary at the Dutcher Library. Before we begin, I wanted to discuss how I will be choosing the stories we read in the month of November. November is Native American Heritage Month. It is a celebration of the diverse cultures, traditions, and contributions of Native people in the United States. It is a time when we also raise awareness about the challenges Native people face, both historically and in the present. This month, First Chapter Friday will read 4 titles about Indian American and Alaska Native experiences that both celebrate Native American heritage and explore the complex social issues Indigenous communities are confronted with. Additionally, on the library catalog, there will be a list of titles for you to choose from if you would like to learn more about Native American heritage or immerse yourself in some really good historical fiction. This list includes Native American authors that are not Native American but are held in high regard for historical fiction and their treatment of the communities they write about. And there are some nonfiction titles included in there as well. So without further ado, let's begin our story. This week we are going to be reading The Warriors by Joseph Bruchac. Chapter 1, In the Box. Jake looked up at the sun in the afternoon sky. It shone right in his face this final quarter of the game, but he didn't mind. "Elder brother," he said in a soft voice, using the old Iroquois name for the sun, "he who loves to watch the people play, I thank you for looking at me." The sun was not the only one looking at Jake and the other teenage lacrosse players. Hundreds of Iroquois people had gathered around the wooden walls of the reservation's new box lacrosse field. It wasn't just the population of the res. Lined up beyond the field were the cars, vans, and pickups that had brought the Tuscarora team and its crowd of fans. Whether it was an adult or junior league game, like the one Jake was playing, Bucksla drew everyone in like noisy bees around a hive. Today the buzz was especially intense. Both teams facing off had gone unbeaten until this final game of their summer season. Today's game would settle who was the best team, the Tuskies or Jake's team, the Junior Warriors. Almost all of Jake's close relatives were in the crowd. He lifted his head to look at them. His aunt and uncle, his younger cousins, they were there. But she wasn't. Grandpa Sky was, though. Like always, his grandfather knew when Jake was looking at him. Grandpa Sky lifted his hand and put it against his chest, making the gesture Jake knew was just for him. Jake thought for a minute about the stories Grandpa Sky told him, about how it was before Europeans came, back when lacrosse was played without walls or boundaries on the fields. Back then, just about everyone, young or old, would have had a lacrosse stick in their hands, playing one village against the other. Now, though, this favorite Iroquois game was played in a field closed in by wooden walls like those of the Canadian indoor rinks, where box lacrosse had first been played in the 1920s during the hockey off-season. Jake shook his head. It was good to remember the stories, but right now he had to keep his mind on the game. He looked quickly around the field, checking the positions of the other 6 men on his team, especially Frank Tarball and Rick Jameson. It was easy to pick Frank out, off to his left, even without seeing the number on his jersey. In August, Frank had dyed his normally jet-black hair bright red. From under his helmet, Frank's ponytail hung down his back like a crimson flag. Rick was just as easy to spot. His long, lean arms and legs made him stand out like a heron in a pond. First Frank, then Rick raised a hand to wave in Jake's direction. Jake raised a hand back to them. He knew they would try to get the ball to him for one last shot. Jake pulled in his chin and pushed out his lower lip. Everyone who knew him knew what that meant. His father had called it Jake's buffalo look. Nothing was going to push him back. 2 minutes to go. The Junior Warriors were behind by 1 score, 7-6. Crunch time. 30 yards downfield, the player opposite Frank scooped up the ball without breaking stride. Driving hard, he planted his left foot and then rolled his right leg back, using his body as a shield. It was the kind of change of direction dodge a lax kid did 20 times every day in drills. Frank should have had no trouble with it. But his foot caught on a loose piece of turf. He stumbled and lost the ball. It bounced once, and then the Tuscarora boy with the number 10 on his jersey caught it in the mesh pocket of his lacrosse stick. Now Rick was the defenseman in front of 10. He swung his long stick across one-handed. The wrap check failed as 10 lowered his own stick, ducked under, and whipped a perfect sidearm pass. The lacrosse ball flew as fast as a diving hawk across the field. It was such a good pass that the Tuscarora midfielder, number 7, smiled as he got ready to catch it. Jake and his teammates had nicknamed this player Sunscreen. That was the way it went in an Iroquois lacrosse game, always teasing the other players, talking good-natured trash at them. Tuscaroras tended to be lighter-skinned than other Iroquois people, so their game names reflected it. 10 was Freckles, 11 was Beach Boy. Jake saw Sunscreen smile. It was the same smile that Jake had noticed on the midfielder's face when he'd scored the goal that put the Warriors down by 1 point. Jake knew what Sunscreen was thinking, but there was no way Jake could get to that pass before he did. In his own mind, Sunscreen was already 20 yards up the field, dodging defenders, set for the overhand shot that would ice the Tuskies' victory. Jake lowered his stick and let his shoulders slump, as if he were giving up, knowing that Sunscreen would see him. It was one of the tricks Uncle Irwin had taught him. You win with your mind as much as you win with your body, Jake. Never let the other side know what you are really thinking. The ball thumped into the pocket of Sunscreen's stick. He lowered it into the box, then pivoted to go around Jake. But Jake wasn't there. Just as the ball had reached the Tuscarora player, Jake had raced behind him. With a perfect poke check, Jake thrust his stick against Sunscreen's gloved lower hand. The ball popped out of the webbing, and Jake snagged it in midair. Jake whipped past one midfielder, then bull-dodged between 2 defenders. The goalie was waiting in a crouch, his web stick looking as wide as a fishnet. He was set to block the overhand shot most midfielders would have tried. Jake was not most midfielders. He was Eddie Forrest's son. As he reached the edge of the crease and he saw the goalie start to follow him across, Jake suddenly planted his left foot, whipped the stick up, and shot the ball backhanded over his left shoulder. It bounced past the goalie's feet and into the net, just a heartbeat before the sound of the referee's whistle ending the game. 7-7, a tie. A shout went up from the crowd on both sides of the field, the same way it almost always did at the end of a game between Indians. It didn't matter which side scored the most points. It was the beauty of the game that mattered, the way it brought people's minds and hearts together. Both sides had played well. Ending in a tie only made it better. "Hey, Buffalo Burger!" someone shouted. Jake turned around, knowing that shout was for him. That was the nickname the Tusky kids had given him. One of them had recognized him from the Green Corn Festival last summer, when Jake had helped his Uncle Irwin run the snack bar tent. They sold traditional Indian powwow foods. Buffalo Burger. It could have been worse. They might have called him corn soup. It was Tusky 7, Sunscreen. A big grin appeared on his wide face. He had his right hand held up in front of him as he approached. "Buffalo Burger boy," he said as he slapped Jake's palm. Jake grinned back. "Sunscreen kid," he said. They switched their hand slap into an Indian power handshake. Between the two of them, they had scored more than half of all the goals that afternoon. "Pete Hall," Sunscreen said, tapping his chest with his left hand as he held onto Jake's wrist with his right. "My dad is that Indian artist. You know the one. You even got one of his pieces here in your school, you know, eh?" Jake nodded. "Jake Forrest. My dad—" He paused, not sure what he was about to say or why he had started to say it. His dad was dead. Had been dead since Jake was 7. Killed when some scaffolding came down on him while he was working iron in Montreal. Jake nodded. "See his son, kid. Oh, nay." "Oh, nay." The other members of Jake's team came up to congratulate him, just as the coaches were calling for the sides to line up. The 2 teams shook hands, laughing about the tie. It's over, Jake thought. The thrill of the game leaving him. It's all over. Usually, a social and a feast would have been shared by both sides. But the buses had had some kind of problem, so they had to have them back before dark. The Tuscarora Junior Eagles and their coaches couldn't stick around, but every kid, coach, and helper was given a paper bag filled with fried bread and a cup of corn soup prepared by the mothers of the junior warriors to enjoy on their ride home. Portable hospitality was better than none at all. A social would still take place for those who had driven their cars all the way from the Tuscarora Reservation near Niagara Falls to be at the game. Family and lacrosse and sharing, they were the heart of being Iroquois. Jake sat down on the side of the field, his helmet and gloves on his right side, his beloved wooden stick on his left. The crowd had moved up to the longhouse for a social. No one else was around. Why is this happening? Why do I have to go off to Maryland? Why do I have to leave the reservation? Leave all my friends and family? This is my land. It's the only place I've ever lived. The reservation was a place where just about everyone else was Indian, and Jake could just be himself. The condo, where he'd be living with his mom, was far from home, in so many ways. What am I going to do? He softly said aloud to himself. Nobody's going to know me there. Nobody. And that is the end of Chapter 1 of The Warriors by Joseph Bruchac. If you'd like to check out this book, it is available at the library. You can place a hold on it or email me to, find out the rest of Jake's story. And if you are interested in learning more about Native American heritage, check out that list on the library catalog website. There are some very good titles about Native American experiences there. I hope you enjoyed this first chapter, and have a great weekend.